Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier. Thanks for stopping by. Apologies for Friday, but I had a wonderful time. And let me tell you a little bit about that and take a little bit of a diversion. I'd like to thank Moshe Pereira of the Mara Fairmont for some wonderful Fairmont moments. We went to visit the Mara Fairmont, which is just on the periphery of the Masai Mara. I put up a photograph of Moshe and also a photograph of a Sundowner that we had who watched this wonderful red sun set over the Mara. Air Kenya, of course, takes you to wonderful magical destinations like the Masai Mara. And I wrote about this before. I said, Wilson Airport is like a magic portal to another world. You sort of go in there and next thing, you're somewhere completely different, watching the sunset in Mara, for example. Aisha tweeted this: a lone tree silhouetted against a fairy sky. I took a 30-second video of our tent under the title of Tent Life. Have a look at that. It was rather grand, a family tent with a sitting room in between. And then have a look at these photographs. One of the first giraffes, of which there are many, we saw, and Anthony, who was our driver, turned to me and said, that giraffe lost half its tail to a hungry hyena. Have a look at the photograph, you'll see that he wasn't wrong. Have a look at this male lion that we found on the property. Pretty impressive fellow, I thought. The salad bar, the food is delicious. Look at the salad bar. They have their own organic garden, some of the best avocado and tomatoes I've ever tasted. We drove from the Fairmont into the Mara proper, and I took this photograph, nothing in front of us but the road to the Mara, crossing through Maasai country. And then this video, which I captioned, "We got you surrounded," said the wildebeest. About 1.5 million wildebeest come into the Mara at this time of year. About 60,000 are in there. But you probably wouldn't realize it was only 60,000. You think it's millions of them. Macro thoughts. I said, this was my piece over the weekend, expect more twists and turns in the financial markets. I'm writing my article from the Fairmont Mara, which is perched on the Mara River and where the soundtrack includes bursts of hippopotami snorting and at night the eerily human sound of tree hyraxes. The Masai Mara remains our premier destination, and if the Fairmont Mara is a proxy, in fact, I do not think it is, then tourism is back and on the crest of a wave. They certainly are. We have so many wonderful places to visit in Kenya, and I find looking at the shape-shifting landscape incredibly therapeutic and sensual. It metaphorically washes away the weak and allows you to look at things as if it were a clean slate. So let's take another spin through the world markets and try and find ourselves a or the sweet spot. Of course, one of the most dramatic moves in this year has been in the sterling pound. The pound struck a 2016 high of 149.50 versus the dollar the day before the Brexit result. Subsequently, it touched 127.99, a 31-year low, and was last at 129.19. Short sellers, folks who sell assets in the expectation that the asset will fall and that they can buy it back cheaper, have had a field day in the pound. I think it can touch 125 and in extremis 120. But we all know the pound is in the habit of overshooting. And at some point the whole world will start thinking, that flat we always thought of buying in London, well, it's now or never. Interestingly, my wife and I were waiting for our Air Kenya flight at Wilson. And a well-known lawyer asked where the shilling-pound rate is heading. I turned to Nisha and I said, see, the point I'm making is that it will turn, and this is an egregious price. I still like the Japanese yen, but obviously there's been a big victory by Shinzo Abe, so we've got to back off the yen for now and see where it ends up. I still think it's headed to 95. Let me check where it is. 101.94. It's backed up on the pretty decisive political outcome in Japan in favor of Prime Minister Abe. I'm overwhelmingly bullish. Precious metals, gold and silver have surged this year to more than 2-year highs. Gold closed last week at 1365, although it's traded off a little bit this morning, and is going to take a run at 1400 probably as early as this week. Silver behaves like gold on steroids and could punch as high as $25 versus a price of around $20.20. You will recall Ben Bernanke's response when he was asked why people hold gold. He said, as protection against what we call tail risks, really, really bad outcomes. Precious metals will, in my opinion, remain sought after, especially given how government bond yields have spun into negative territory from Japan through Switzerland and parts of Europe. If you have to pay governments to buy their bonds, you're better off buying gold, because you might not get any interest, but 0% is better than a negative yield. Closer home, African Eurobond markets have been like a canary in the coal mine. Policy-making failures, Angola's Dos Santos throwing over the IMF's Christine Lagarde is one, Mozambique's secret off-the-books loans another, are being punished severely. Investors need to keep an eye on the Eurobond market because the signal is loud, clear, and unadulterated. This year, we've witnessed the most extraordinary moves in the financial markets. There are many more twists and turns to come, that's for sure. Have a look at the sterling chart. Speculation is building the Bank of England Governor Mark Carney will use the Thursday meeting to follow up on his pledge to take whatever steps are necessary to spur the economy. The chances of the central bank cutting interest rates by July 14 have jumped to 74% from 11% just before the decision to leave the European Union was announced. The UK pound has now overtaken the Argentine peso to become the worst FX performer in 2016. Have a look at this Bloomberg chart. And incredibly, the pound is more volatile than Bitcoin of all things. I like this quote, "Welcome to the world of Japanification," talking about how Japan is aging fast, the economic boom is busted, there is no sign of recovery, that's something that will happen to the other countries. Explaining why we're seeing this lurch into negative yields, particularly in Japan. Japanese debt has returned 7.1% in the first 6 months of the year, while treasuries have rallied 5.7%, their best first half in 6 years. Political reflections, as we spoke about, Abe is set for an upper house supermajority or very close to after this Japanese election. He says, "I think this means I am being told to accelerate Abenomics, so I want to respond to the expectations of the people." And I think clearly he's got the numbers, and it's going to be quite a seismic shift because it's obviously going to remilitarize Japan. China's Xinhua News, China builds 4 lighthouses, the 5th in construction in the South China Sea to aid navigation. My conclusions are we've got to keep an eye on these developments because the US Navy is prowling the South China Sea. Xinhua again, DPRK warns of retaliation against THAAD deployment by US and South Korea. Bear in mind that this THAAD deployment is pointed at North Korea but also at China. So the Chinese probably encouraged him to say that. Powerful image, a woman stands her ground at Baton Rouge. Black Lives Matter protests. This picture is by Jonathan Bachman of Reuters. The sacking of Palmyra. The dead ISIS fighters are from Chechnya, Afghanistan, Pakistan. There are a few Kuwaitis and Qataris, but also many Saudis, the intelligence man says, and their bodies were buried by his army in a proper way, in Sharia law, in a Muslim cemetery, the general insists. That would certainly be a change from other Syrian battlefields where the men whom the government calls terrorists are left unburied to be eaten by dogs. Some of the dead foreign fighters are dragged away by ISIS, an odd tactic noticed over several years in Syria, sometimes adopted with the use of hooks to extricate corpses, while others are burned by the Islamists after they die. Jeremy Corbyn backs call for Tony Blair to face contempt motion in Parliament. Parliament must hold to account, including Tony Blair, those who took us into this particular war. That is surely how a parliamentary democracy works. I haven't seen the motion yet, but I think I would probably back it. The motion could be debated in the next few weeks, provided it is approved by the Speaker. And I concluded by saying the attempted coup d'etat against Corbyn was a preemptive strike by the Blairites to avoid exactly this outcome that Corbyn is outlining. Let's move on to the markets. US yield curve not buying the jobs data, which was good, I thought. Instead flags low growth and inflation below 76 basis points, the flattest since November 2007. When you see the yield curve flattening, it's normally because folks are looking through and seeing a much easier interest rate environment. Let's move on to the currency markets. Euro, dollar 110.21, dollar index above 96.28, which is when I checked it last. Japanese yen got above 102. Where are we now? 101.87. Swiss franc 0.9827. The pound, which sort of firmed up, but now it's below 129 at 128.80. And under pressure. Aussie dollar, let's take a look at that. 0.7536, that's down as well. India rupee 67.105. South Korean won 1146.50. The Rial 330.05. Egyptian pound 8.8923. Lots of talk of a possible devaluation as early as this week. And the Rand, which I think is a big sell, at 14.62. Another debt bonanza. Abe to order fresh stimulus of more than 10 trillion yen, mulls adding JGB issuance, Bloomberg reports. Dollar yen, as Abe talks about preparing economic stimulus, is obviously backing up, and I think, we're at 101.87, we just briefly crossed 102, but we can get up to about 103.50. Japan's Nikkei, when I checked this morning, was up a cool 200 points. Dollar index held over that key level I spoke about, 93, and therefore, in my view, remains bullish. Euro dollar were last trading at 110.25. In big trouble, in my view, because whatever's happened with the Brexit can happen on the euro. Let's move on to the commodity markets. The rally is fizzling out. Javier Blas put out the commodity index chart. Another article talks about, we think there's a correction coming in oil. You can say that again. The Bloomberg Commodities Index has gained 10% this year, snapping a 5-year drop. Robusta Coffee, this is the fund's most bullish pick. It's had its best run since April 2014, and the expectation by these guys, who were ex-Cargill, is that we'll see a 14% rally. Market participants have taken a record gold position, and this is really going back to Bernanke's comments, uncertain markets pushing people into gold. Gold chart last trading just around 1360. Crude oil, have a look at this chart. I think it's an outrageous sell. And have a look at this chart from Holger as well. US drilling rigs increasing the most since April, and this is not being factored in, which is telling me two things. It's telling me that the US, particularly the shale producers, are very flexible and actually make money at these levels. So far from being busted by the Saudis, they're back, and that really puts into whole question the Saudi strategy. So I'm a seller of crude oil as well. Venezuelan bonds are among the highest paying investments in emerging markets, offering today an average yield of 26% in dollars. Have a look at this chart, which is comparing the Venezuela 2027 bond with Brent crude, and is practically mirroring it exactly. But interestingly, for a socialist country, since Chavez swept into office 17 years ago, the country's bonds have handed investors a total return of 517%, which must be one of the best returns in the global markets, in the bond markets. Let's move on to sub-Saharan Africa and the news coming out of South Sudan, which isn't positive. Zero command and control in Juba. God help South Sudan, tweeted the South Sudan Patriot. At least 272 people have died in fighting between rival factions in the capital, Juba, including 33 civilians. Have a look at this video that Ben Phillips uploaded of what was going on Sunday. Forces loyal to the Vice President of South Sudan say their positions in the capital, Juba, have been attacked by government troops. So we got a very difficult situation, and my view here is that they're just simply not capable of getting this leadership in South Sudan as it is currently. They know how to fight a war, they know nothing else. The evidence that we have gathered so far shows that the French embassy in Harare and other embassies are part of this plot as part of their regime change machinations, accusing the French embassy in particular. Zambia elections body holds campaigning in capital over violence. This was the story of an opposition supporter, a teenager being shot dead. Zambia's electoral commission has suspended campaigning in 2 areas, including the capital, Lusaka, due to escalating political violence, after their political party was denied permission to hold a rally. Africa Confidential is talking about a close political race gets angrier. Government has closed the leading independent newspaper, which uncovered plans to rig next month's election. Credible claims of bias of the Electoral Commission of Zambia and the suspicious inflation of the number of registered voters are heating up the campaign ahead of presidential and parliamentary elections on the 11th of August. The contest between incumbent President Edgar Lungu, who likes a tepel, of the Patriotic Front and his opponent Hakainde Hichilema of the United Party for National Development was always going to be close. Now it is getting bad-tempered, with claims of thuggery on all sides. Opposition activists say the government's forcible closure 2 weeks ago of the Post, the best-selling independent daily, is a sign of desperation in the Lungu camp. At the last election in January 2015, Lungu beat Hichilema by just under 30,000 votes. Since then, the economy has nosedived due to the crash in the price of copper and the sharp weakening of the kwacha against the dollar. The signs are that Hichilema, a rather stolid businessman, has been gaining on Lungu, whose populism and lack of focus is beginning to pall on hard-pressed Zambians. Lungu also threatened Hichilema personally, saying at one rally, if HH refuses to accept the election results, he will see what I will do to him, he said. Closely contested elections in Africa are a recipe for a disaster. South African land price court ruling seen deterring investment. A ruling by a South African judge saying the state must pay a landowner less than the ground's market value in an expropriation claim may deter further investment by farmers, a Barclays Africa Group economist said. It will put the agricultural sector in dire stress. You will stop seeing growth. Anything that breaks down security values, property rights, is a deterrent for investment. Zuma populism to send Rand to 17 versus the dollar. This is the top forecaster. He's saying that recovering the Rand, which has gained 6% against the dollar this year, after a 25% decline in 2015, will be cut short. The government shows an overall bias to act more populist, Krieger said. This is the basic balance of the government, and I'm afraid this will go on because unemployment is pretty high in South Africa and should remain so. South African all shares up 1.15% this year. Dollar Rand, let's put up a 6-month chart. I think we're going to soften up from now. I'd sell it. Egyptian's EGX30 index jumped 4.7% at the close in Cairo yesterday, with trading volumes 157% above the average of the past 20 days. Egypt is suffering a hard currency shortage that's prompted the government to plan a Eurobond sale and start informal talks with the IMF. Traders are betting the country may weaken the pound as soon as Tuesday. I'll put up a chart of the Egyptian pound. The Egyptian EGX30 highest since 14th June, up 7.3% this year. Nigerian all shares up 0.74% this year. The Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index is down 9.98% this year. Narendra Modi pictures from the community program this evening. The atmosphere was full of vibrancy. He reached out to the Indian diaspora here and met with them at Kasarani. He tweeted, "Hello Kenya, delighted to visit this friendly nation with whom India has enjoyed close ties historically." And then History Kenya tweeted, "From 20th September 1981, President Moi receives India's first woman premier, Indira Gandhi, at Jomo Kenyatta Airport." The Kenya shilling is the fifth best performing currency in sub-Saharan Africa. Goes back to what I was saying about the Teflon shilling. Nairobi all share down 3.22% in 2016, but the highest level this month. NSE 20 down 8.72% this year, but highest level in July as well. In 28 years of living in Nairobi, I've seen the number of people quadruple and car ownership go from 5% to 27%. The pollution is mind-boggling. Thinell's research uncovered dramatic pollution spikes on all of Nairobi's main roads. The pollution is uncontrolled and particularly deadly in slum districts and for drivers, street vendors and traffic police. A couple more photographs from my weekend trip. Fancy a swim. I have some zebras taking a swim. And then this is a very famous lion called Notch. He's the king of the Mara, and he was sort of behaving like a lover boy when we found him with his latest lady. And I'll put up that photograph as well. Liberty mulls multiple acquisition targets among Kenyan insurers. This is an article in Bloomberg. Considering as many as 10 acquisition targets as part of the insurer's 5-year strategy to increase its foothold in East Africa's biggest economy. TransCentury raised its stake in Civicon to 78%. Of course, we know they've had the challenges, but the Afrexim Bank has come in a big way. And that will reduce their funding costs and improve the profile, but it surely will mean that there's going to be a pretty big dilution of existing shareholders. Once again, thank you for stopping by. I'm always grateful.